There is a man alive today who should not be. Not because the world didn't want him, but because the universe sent everything it had to take him out. Cancer the size of a sheet of paper growing silently inside his body for God knows how long. Then chemotherapy that stripped his immune system down to nothing. Then COVID hitting him while he had zero defenses, sending him to a hospital bed where it took 15 full minutes and 100% oxygen just to turn over. His wife stood outside the hospital doors asking doctors if her husband of 48 years was going to survive. The doctors answered carefully, not because they were being diplomatic, but because they genuinely did not know. That man is Jeff Bridges. And what happened next is one of the most quietly extraordinary stories in American life. Not because he survived. Survival alone is not a story. What makes this a story is what he did with the survival. What he said, what he chose, and what he is still doing right now in 2026 that is making Hollywood sit up and take notice all over again. We're going to go through all of it today. The boy who grew up in his famous father's shadow. The 8 years in military service that nobody talks about. The first marriage meeting that looked like a disaster and turned into 48 years of the real thing. The night the doctors found what was inside him. The 5 weeks that followed. The moment he made the decision, not the wish, the actual decision, that he was going to walk his daughter down the aisle no matter what his body said. And the brand new chapter that is unfolding right now as you watch this. If you are not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that subscribe button right now and click the bell icon so you never miss a story like this. Because the next one is already coming, and it will not be what you expect. Let's get into it. There is a particular kind of cruelty that comes with being born into a family where the last name already means something before you have figured out what you mean. Jeff Bridges was born on December 4th, 1949, in Los Angeles. His father was Lloyd Bridges, one of the most recognizable faces on American television. For 5 years, from 1958 to 1961, Lloyd played Mike Nelson on Sea Hunt, the calm, competent scuba diver who saved the day every single week in millions of living rooms across the country. Children idolized him. Parents trusted him. And in the Bridges household in Holmby Hills, the television was not just furniture. It was a window into what the family name could mean, what it could carry, and what weight it placed on the people born into it. Jeff was 8 years old when he first appeared alongside his father on Sea Hunt. 8 years old. Most kids that age are losing teeth and learning to ride bikes. Jeff Bridges was already on a professional set, already carrying the family name in front of cameras, already absorbing without fully understanding it what it meant to be watched, to inhabit a character, to perform. He did not choose it. It was simply the world he was born into. The way weather is. The way gravity is. His mother Dorothy was an actress and a writer. His older brother Bo would go on to become an actor. The house itself seemed to breathe performance. Dinner conversations were rehearsals for something even when nothing was being rehearsed. Art was the family language. Ambition was the family atmosphere. And somewhere inside all of that, a small boy was quietly trying to figure out which parts of himself were genuinely his own and which parts belonged to the name he had been handed at birth. There was something else in that house, something that almost never gets mentioned in profiles and retrospectives, but that matters in ways that are hard to articulate and impossible to dismiss. There was a brother before Jeff. His name was Garrett, born in 1948, dead the same year. Sudden infant death syndrome. Jeff has mentioned him rarely, carefully, in the way you mention a wound that has healed over without ever quite closing. But the fact of Garrett matters. Jeff Bridges grew up in a family that had already known what it meant to have a crib go quiet. Grief that arrives before your birth still shapes the air you breathe. It still defines, in ways no one can fully explain, how seriously you hold the life you were given. The adolescence was not smooth. Drugs arrived the way they arrived for many young men of his generation in Los Angeles, casually at first, and then not casually at all. Lloyd and Dorothy intervened. The details were kept inside the family, the way families handle these things when they still believe that love and proximity can redirect a life. In this case, they could. Barely. But they could. He went to New York and studied acting at the Herbert Berghof studio, where the instruction was serious and the expectations were merciless in the best possible way. And then, in 1967, he did something that surprises almost everyone who hears it. He enlisted. Not in the army. Not in Vietnam. In the Coast Guard, where he served until 1975. 8 years in uniform. 8 years of structure and physical reality, and a world that had absolutely no interest in whose son you were or how naturally you moved on camera. 8 years of being a man before being a star. Those 8 years are almost never discussed when people talk about Jeff Bridges. They should be discussed every single time. Because something happened to him in that stretch of service that no studio could manufacture and no acting class could teach. He learned what it felt like to have a life that was his own. And that sequence, man first, star second, would quietly define everything that came after. When he returned to the screen in earnest, the critics noticed something they struggled to name. Pauline Kael, the most feared and respected film critic of her generation, eventually found the words. She called him possibly the most natural and least self-conscious actor who ever lived. Not the most technically gifted, not the most disciplined, the most natural. As if the performance were simply what happened when Jeff Bridges allowed himself to be present in a room. He had spent the first part of his life learning to separate his light from his father's. The second part, he simply stood in it. His first major film role came in 1971. The Last Picture Show, Peter Bogdanovich's devastating portrait of a dying Texas town, shot in black and white because color would have been too generous for that particular story. Jeff played Dwayne Jackson, a young man with nowhere interesting to go and no real sense of what he was losing. He was 21 years old. He received his first Academy Award nomination. His first major film role, 21 years old, and the Academy was already paying attention. That early recognition could have done what early recognition almost always does. It could have calcified him, given him a self-image to protect and a version of himself to repeat until repetition got mistaken for identity. Most actors fall into that trap. The first great performance becomes a template, and the template becomes a ceiling. Jeff Bridges refused the trap without appearing to notice it was there. What followed across the 70s and 80s was not a carefully managed career. It was something stranger and more honest than that. A series of choices that seemed to follow curiosity rather than strategy. Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. King Kong. Tron in 1982, before digital filmmaking was a language anyone fully understood. Starman, for which he received his second Oscar nomination, playing an alien learning to inhabit a human body with such specific, unhurried physicality that audiences forgot they were watching something designed to be strange. Heaven's Gate, which nearly destroyed everyone associated with it, and which he walked away from without apparent damage to his reputation or his sense of self. He seemed incapable of phoniness. Not because he was without complexity or darkness, the roles he chose made clear he understood both, but because whatever complexity he carried it directly. There was no distance between Jeff Bridges and the camera. Most actors, even great ones, have a perceptible layer between themselves and the lens, a layer of craft and intention and carefully managed revelation. You admire the work even as you sense the working. With Bridges, that layer simply did not appear to exist. And then, in 1975, while filming Rancho Deluxe in Montana, he met her. She was a local woman working as a waitress. Her name was Susan Jeston. When Jeff Bridges first saw her, she had 2 black eyes and a broken nose from a recent car accident. By every conventional measure, it was not the ideal first impression. By every measure that has ever actually mattered, it was the only first impression that would ever count. He was 25. She was 22. And something in him, something that all the Zen practice and philosophical temperament he would later develop helped him articulate, but that he felt long before he had the language for it, simply recognized her. Not as a conquest. Not as a story to tell later. As home. They married in 1977. 2 years after that first meeting, with its black eyes and broken nose and immediate, undefended certainty. The marriage that followed was not a Hollywood marriage. It was not a publicized arrangement refreshed periodically with photographs and managed through representatives. It was a life. A shared life conducted mostly away from the machinery of celebrity, anchored by a ranch in Montana that became the true center of their world. 3 daughters arrived. Isabel, Jessica, Haley. The family grew the way families grow when the people at the center of them are genuinely paying attention. In 1984, Jeff founded the End Hunger Network, a nonprofit dedicated to ending childhood hunger in America. He had no publicist's blueprint for what this should look like. He simply could not reconcile the fact of hungry children with the fact of his own abundance. So he did something about it. He has continued doing something about it for over 40 years, not as a celebrity cause, not as a brand extension, but as a responsibility he accepted and never put down. The Oscar nominations kept accumulating. The Fabulous Baker Boys in 1989, The Fisher King in 1991, and then in 1998, The Big Lebowski arrived and gave the world the dude, a character so completely inhabited, so utterly without artifice, that an entire generation adopted him as a kind of secular saint of acceptance. The dude abides. It sounds like a joke. It is not entirely a joke. There is genuine philosophy in that abiding, and Jeff Bridges understood it before the film became a cultural phenomenon. Seabiscuit. The Door in the Floor. Iron Man in 2008, playing the villain Obadiah Stane with a calm menace that made the antagonist more compelling than the hero. And then in 2010, after 39 years of nominations and near misses, and an accumulation of work that would have justified the award a dozen times over, the Academy gave him the Oscar for Crazy Heart. He accepted it with the ease of a man who had spent his whole life preparing for the moment by never quite preparing for it. He thanked Susan. He thanked his daughters. He thanked his father Lloyd, who had died in 2001 and could not be there to hear it. The audience rose. And then Jeff Bridges walked off stage, went back to Montana, and continued being a husband and a father and a man who meditates before work. He had built a life that looked like everything a person could want. And he had built it well enough that when everything suddenly became uncertain, it was the life, not the career, not the awards, not the accumulated recognition, that held. October of 2020 arrived the way catastrophe usually arrives for people who have been careful. Without warning. Without the slow accumulation of signs that might have allowed for some kind of preparation. One day Jeff Bridges was a 70-year-old man in excellent health. A man who meditated every morning, walked the Montana ranch with the unhurried ease of someone who had made his peace with seasons, and had just finished work on a new project with more on the way. And then the doctors found it. A mass in his abdomen. 9 inches by 12 inches. Those dimensions require a moment of stillness to absorb. 9 by 12 inches is not an abstraction. It is the size of a standard sheet of paper. It is something you can hold in your hands and look at and understand concretely as a thing that has been growing inside a person without that person knowing. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system, the very network the body uses to fight disease, now turned against itself, now become the enemy wearing the armor of the defender. He was 70 years old. He had survived adolescent drug use and the specific madness of Hollywood's worst decades and the physical demands of a career spanning 5 decades. He had survived all of it intact or near enough to intact that the difference was negligible. And now this. He announced the diagnosis publicly with the directness that had always characterized him. No corporate statement filtered through representatives. No carefully managed revelation designed to control the narrative. A post written in his own hand, his own words, his own characteristic handwriting, as if the act of physically forming the letters was itself a way of accepting what the letters said. He called the community around him his boatmen, the people who would help him navigate. This is a man who had spent decades studying Zen Buddhism seriously, not as a lifestyle accessory, not as a celebrity affectation, but as a genuine practice undertaken with the rigor of someone who believes that the nature of mind and the nature of reality are questions worth devoting a life to. The practice was not something he picked up when things got difficult. It was already there, already part of the architecture of his days, when difficulty arrived. The chemotherapy began. What chemotherapy must do to be effective against a cancer of the lymphatic system is dismantle the immune system. Not weaken it. Dismantle it. The treatment attacks the cancer by attacking the body's ability to defend itself, which means that during treatment, the patient exists in a state of radical vulnerability. Every virus, every ordinary environmental threat that a functioning immune system handles without conscious effort becomes potentially catastrophic. Jeff Bridges, his immune system dismantled by the chemical assault on the lymphoma in his abdomen, contracted COVID-19. He was hospitalized for 5 weeks. 5 weeks is a duration that does not translate well into abstraction. It is 35 days. It is the disappearance of more than a month. It is long enough for the outside world to continue its seasons without you. He could not breathe without 100% supplemental oxygen. And turning over in his hospital bed, the simple act of repositioning his own body from one side to the other took 15 full minutes. 15 minutes of managed agony, of breath that only arrived because machines were delivering it at maximum capacity. His wife Susan stood outside that hospital, asking doctors whether her husband of over 4 decades was going to survive. The doctors told her they were doing the best they could. There are moments in a life when language reaches its limit, when the carefully maintained vocabulary of hope and resilience and fighting spirit encounters something that does not respond to vocabulary. Jeff Bridges has said that COVID made his cancer look like nothing. 6 words. The compression of 5 weeks of hospitalization, 100% oxygen, 15-minute turns, and a wife asking doctors whether he was going to die, all gathered into 6 words that rearrange retroactively the entire story of his illness. And yet, in the middle of all of it, lying in that hospital bed on 100% oxygen with a 9 by 12-inch mass in his abdomen being dismantled by chemicals that had also dismantled his immune system, Jeff Bridges made a decision. Not a wish, not a hope, a decision. His youngest daughter Haley was engaged. There was a wedding somewhere in the not-yet-arrived future. And Jeff Bridges decided, with the particular stubbornness of a man who understands the difference between surrender and acceptance, that he was going to walk her down the aisle. He did not know if he could. He knew that he was going to. The mass responded to chemotherapy. Slowly, then less slowly. By September of 2021, the announcement came. Remission. The 9 by 12-inch mass that had announced itself like a verdict had shrunk to the size of a marble. A single marble, where once there had been a sheet of paper of malignancy. The lymphoma had been pushed back to the point of clinical insignificance. But COVID left its own residue. It always does. For Jeff Bridges, the long aftermath included memory problems, the kind of cognitive fog that lingers after severe respiratory infection, that makes a man suddenly uncertain of words he has known for decades, and the complete loss of smell. He cannot smell his wife. He cannot smell Montana after rain. He has said, with the specific humor of a man who has earned the right to laugh at his own suffering, that Susan goes days without showering and he notices nothing, and that she finds this genuinely funny. They have found the comedy available even here. And still the marble. He came home to Susan. This fact, stated plainly, does not capture what it contains. After 5 weeks in a hospital during a pandemic, after the oxygen dependency and the sleeplessness and the specific indignity of a body that could not perform its most basic functions without mechanical assistance, he came home to the woman he had fallen in love with in Montana in 1975, the woman with the 2 black eyes and the broken nose whom he had recognized immediately as the person he was going to spend his life with. In 2021, Haley Bridges got married. Her father walked her down the aisle. There is a photograph from that day. Jeff Bridges, visibly changed by the year that preceded it, thinner, marked by what serious illness marks on a face, standing beside his daughter in the light of a day that had, against genuine medical odds, arrived. He is smiling. Not the performed smile of a man demonstrating resilience for an audience. The smile of a man who was precisely, completely, unreservedly where he decided he was going to be. He went back to work. The Old Man, the FX series in which he played a retired intelligence operative dragged out of the quiet he had constructed for himself, ran for 2 seasons. And then came something no one expected, or rather, something that had been sitting quietly in boxes for nearly 50 years waiting to be rediscovered. Recordings surfaced from 1977 and 1978, the years just after his marriage to Susan, jam sessions made for no audience, music created in the pure spirit of play, preserved without intention, released now under the title Slow Magic. As if the past had decided, in his 76th year, to send him a message about who he had always been underneath everything. A man who made music in rooms when no one was watching. A man who kept the recordings not because he planned to use them, but because something in him understood that what happens in private is not less real than what happens in public. And now, as of right now in 2026, Jeff Bridges is in the middle of what might be the most unexpected creative stretch of his entire career. Tron. Ares was released in October 2025, 43 years after the original Tron, and Bridges returned as Kevin Flynn, the digital legend who seemingly died in Tron: Legacy. He spoke about the return with characteristic mystery, noting that in the digital universe of the grid, anything is possible, and that he was genuinely surprised by the way his character found a way to exist in the new story. The film brought together an entirely new generation of moviegoers with the man who had first stepped into that digital world when the technology required to tell that story barely existed. But that is not all. In March of 2026, it was announced that Jeff Bridges has joined the voice cast of Minions and Monsters, the new Illumination animated film set to hit theaters on July 1st of this year. The film, a prequel to Despicable Me set in 1920s Hollywood, brings together some of the most acclaimed actors working today. Alongside Bridges, the cast includes Oscar winners Allison Janney and Christoph Waltz, along with Jesse Eisenberg, Zoe Deutsch, and Trey Parker. The franchise has generated over $5.5 billion globally, and this new chapter is being directed by Pierre Coffin, who has helmed the Minions films since their debut. For a man who once said during his illness that he did not think he would ever work again, the current moment is extraordinary. Not just surviving, thriving, creating, showing up for the work, for the world, for whatever comes next with the same openness he has practiced for 50 years. He recently told People magazine that his health is very good. He said he is feeling good, though he acknowledged that some things, it is hard to tell if it is the cancer and the COVID or if it is just old age. That sentence contains more wisdom than most self-help books published in the last decade. The refusal to distinguish between what the disease took and what time was always going to take anyway. The acceptance of the complete ledger. The refusal to demand that the categories be clean. And through it all, Susan. The woman who asked the doctors whether he was going to survive. The woman he cannot smell and who laughs at him about it. The woman he has been married to since 1977, through Hollywood and Montana and cancer and recovery and 50 jam sessions in boxes and a daughter's wedding and whatever comes next on this list that does not seem to be ending. Jeff Bridges has said that his brush with mortality brought him a real gift. That life is brief and beautiful. For words, not a consolation, not a prescription, an observation. The kind that only arrives when you have stopped trying to make life into something other than what it is. Brief, beautiful, both things at once. He spent decades playing men who faced the worst with grace. Then the worst came for him. And somehow, not through performance, not through the careful management of a public image, not through the heroic narrative that Hollywood might have constructed for him, he found a way to actually mean it. He wakes up in the morning and meditates, as he has for decades. He walks the Montana land with Susan. He makes music that no one asked for and voices animated characters in films that will reach millions of children, and he steps back into digital universes 40 years after he first entered them, all with the unhurried openness of a man who has stopped needing to know how the story ends. The olfactory loss remains. The memory fog visits. The body keeps its honest ledger of what the illness cost, and what time has continued adding to the bill. And still he says it. Life is brief and beautiful. This is what 76 years of genuine presence actually looks like. Not the absence of suffering. Not the transcendence of loss. Not the performance of a man who has processed everything cleanly and arrived at a wisdom he can offer you in quotable form. But the continued daily, imperfect, irreplaceable act of being here. In this body. On this land. Beside this woman. Inside this life. Without requiring it to be other than what it is. Jeff Bridges did not survive cancer and COVID and the long renegotiation with mortality so that the story would have a satisfying ending. He survived because Susan asked the doctors and the doctors answered carefully, and he decided on 100% oxygen with 15 minutes between positions that Haley's wedding was worth fighting toward. He survived because the chemotherapy worked and because the body is sometimes more stubborn than the disease. And what he has done with the survival is not remarkable. That is exactly the point. He has done the ordinary things, the meditations and the walks and the meals and the evenings with Susan and the music made for no audience, with the attention of a man who knows now in his bones, rather than just his philosophy, that the ordinary things are the ones that matter. That the ordinary morning is the extraordinary thing. That presence is not a technique. It is the whole point. What would it mean for you, not as a cliche, but as an actual question worth sitting with, to treat this day with the same attention that Jeff Bridges has learned to bring to his? He is still here, still feeling it, still walking into rooms and allowing whatever is in them to actually reach him. Without armor, without the buffer of performance, without the need for the moment to be anything other than what it is. 76 years old. The most natural thing in any room he enters. If this story reached something in you today, drop it in the comments. Not a summary of what you thought, but the one thing it actually made you feel. And if you know someone who needs to hear this right now, send it to them without any explanation. Just send it. They will understand why. Subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you are here for what comes next, because the next story is already waiting and it will not be what you expect.